Even before France had surrendered, he was looking for ways of striking back and of keeping resistance alive in the countries which had been overrun. Just as the last troops were being taken off the beaches of Dunkirk, Churchill was already planning ahead. He wrote to his chiefs of staff demanding the formation of raiding forces which could attack the coasts of occupied Europe. Within a few days, a call for volunteers had been circulated to create a force of 5,000 men. They were to be called commandos, after the highly mobile Boer units which had fought the British for 3 years in South Africa at the turn of the century. 10 commando units, each of 500 men, were set up. They began practicing attacks from the sea. One unit was ordered to specialize in parachuting and using assault gliders. This soon became the basis of the separate parachute regiment. Admiral Sir Roger Keyes was appointed Director of Combined Operations. Churchill instructed him to prepare to mount 3 major raids as soon as the threat of an invasion of Britain had passed. One of Keyes' first tasks was to develop ships which could land his new troops. 3 cross-channel ferries were converted so as to carry landing craft. On March the 4th, 1941, 2 commando units and a demolition squad were landed on the Lofoten Islands off northern Norway. Their main objective was to destroy factories which converted fish oil into glycerine for explosives. The commandos achieved total surprise and landed without a shot being fired. A German armed trawler in the harbour was seized. They quickly destroyed the factories and the fish oil tanks. One officer could not resist using the local post office to send a telegram to A. Hitler, Berlin. It read, "Reference your last speech. I thought you said that wherever British troops land on the continent of Europe, German soldiers will face them. Well, where are they?" The commandos then rounded up 60 Norwegian collaborators and 225 German prisoners before returning without any losses. With them, they also took 115 Norwegian volunteers. These would then join the Free Norwegian forces in Britain. The Lofoten raid was an enormous public relations success and a huge boost for British morale. But its most important result was one which could not be publicized: the capture of a set of rotors for an Enigma machine. Although the machine had been thrown overboard from the armed trawler, its crew forgot the spares. They were to give invaluable help to the cryptographers of Bletchley Park in breaking the German naval codes. Then in December 1941, 4 commando units landed at the Norwegian port of Vagsø and were immediately involved in heavy fighting. The approach to Vagsø was covered by the small island of Malå, on which the Germans had placed artillery. This was quickly overrun, but across the water in Vagsø, the fighting was intense. It took several hours for the main German garrison to be subdued. The commandos then blew up several factories and sank 8 ships before withdrawing. These raids convinced Hitler that sooner or later the British would attempt to retake Norway. So for the remaining 4 years of the war, he kept some 250,000 troops there. Troops which might have proved vital on other fronts. But effective as they were, commando raids were not enough to stop the Nazis. Churchill needed other ways to hurt them, so he focused on the resistance movements in the occupied countries. In July 1940, a Special Operations Executive, SOE, was formed, as Churchill put it, to set Europe ablaze. Its objectives were to encourage sabotage of the enemy war effort, gather intelligence and prepare clandestine forces to disrupt German defenses. The bulk of SOE's activities centered on France. Soon agents were recruited in Britain to build up and coordinate the French resistance networks. Radio operators and couriers were also trained to support them. One problem was how to get these teams into the country. Submarines, high-speed launches and fishing vessels were all tried out, but the German coastal defenses proved difficult to penetrate. The answer was aircraft. And in August 1940, a special RAF unit was set up with Whitley bombers and short takeoff and landing Westland Lysanders. Agents and equipment were either parachuted in from the bombers or flown in and brought out by the Lysanders. On moonlit nights, a growing number of reception committees would be waiting as an increasingly widespread network of resistance groups was built up. But all the while, they were hunted by an increasingly sophisticated German counter-espionage system. This used direction-finding equipment to locate hidden radios and double agents to infiltrate networks. The work of SOE agents was desperately perilous, and their life expectancy short. The slightest lapse in concentration might betray them to the Gestapo. Many suffered torture and death. But Churchill was sure it was worth it. Keeping resistance alive in the occupied countries gave hope to millions that liberation would eventually come. The British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, was also enlisted to raise the hopes of those living under German rule. It broadcast the news in all the languages of the occupied countries. The German penalty for listening to these bulletins was death. But people tuned in regardless. The BBC also played a crucial role in transmitting coded messages to resistance groups. These always came after the 9 o'clock news.
Message très important pour le chef de Gaël. Attention, il va pleuvoir bougrement ce soir.
For the peoples of occupied Europe, the prospect of liberation might only be a distant dream, but in the middle of 1941 it suddenly became more likely. For by then, Britain was no longer alone in fighting Nazism. It had gained a massive ally, but it wasn't America, which Churchill had assiduously been courting. It was the Soviet Union.
Freedom's not free. Somebody has to pay the price. And those boys did.